Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us today. People in our canning group on Facebook, Safe Canning by the Book on Debbie's Back Porch, have a lot of questions about Tattler reusable lids, and many people have a little trouble with them. So I thought that I would do a tutorial today on using Tattler lids canning chicken. Now, I can a lot of chicken, mostly because I have 3 very old dogs with lots of allergies, and when I could find chicken for 99 cents a pound, I figured that's as cheap as buying dog food. And I'm going to show you how I do that with Tattlers. If you will, give us a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'm going to show you how these work for me. Now, I have a lot of Tattler lids, and they come in 2 pieces, the lid itself and the seal. Now, these are the old type Tattlers. They also make an easy seal Tattler, but I'll be honest with you, I do them the exact same way. And you can see it says Stieg Tattlers on here. If you have the easy seal, it will also say that. Now, the first question most people ask is, are they safe? Have they been tested? And I can tell you that National Center for Home Food Preservation did test them. They did the research and found that Tattlers had the same success rate as the regular metal lids. I can personally tell you that there is a learning curve, but it's not a steep learning curve, and it only takes a couple seconds longer per jar once you get the hang of it. Now, the first tip I'm going to give you is, before you do anything, test the seals. That means put them on the lids and make sure that there are no gaps, that the seals are perfect, that they're an exact fit for the lids. And when you've done it properly and you turn it over, you won't see any of the seal. If you see any of the seal when you look at the back of it, then that means that perhaps your seal has stretched. The lids themselves last forever. The seals may eventually have to be replaced. I've personally never had to replace any, but common sense tells me they will eventually wear out. So you want to be careful to check them every time you use them. Now, I'm going to can somewhere between 6 and 8 jars, and I am checking the lids. You know, anything that's manufactured can have a flaw, so you want to check them to make sure there are no rough edges. Now we're going to talk about the rings. And this next step is something I do even when I'm using metal lids. Now, you see the inside of this ring? This was washed in the dishwasher and then dried. And technically, you shouldn't get any rust or gunk when you do that. But you know, the inside of this ring is made with a little metal fold, and water can get in that fold, and even if you dry it really, really well, a little bit of that water can seep out. So before I can, I take just a second to make sure I clean that out really well with a little vinegar and a paper towel. Let me tell you why that's so important, especially with Tattlers. The process using Tattlers is a little bit different than the process using a one-time metal lid. With the metal lid, you're going to make one seal. It will be the lid sealed to the jar. Did you see this? These are clean rings. They've been cleaned and dried, and look what you can get out of here. Back to my story. So your metal lid makes a seal with the rim of the jar. A Tattler has to make 2 seals. It has to connect the seal to the jar, and it has to connect the seal to the lid, so you have two seals. So it's very important that the ring fits snugly and moves smoothly. So sometimes when people have trouble with Tattler sealing, they blame the lids when the problem is the ring. Now I want you to look at this ring, and it's very difficult for you to see, I know, but it's out of round. One side is bent inward just a little bit. Throw that away. It can cause a seal failure on any kind of lid. So I'm getting all of my parts together here. I washed my lids and seals in hot soapy water and rinsed them. And now I have them in a bowl with some hot water, not boiling water, hot water, just to a simmer. And I have some vinegar and I have my chopsticks. I long ago broke my little measuring tool to debubble, and I use chopsticks. And I'm getting my jars, and I have some hot water in a measuring cup. I am following the directions in the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving, page 398. And something about this recipe that's different, no other recipe I've ever seen says this, but for raw packed chicken it says to use room temperature jars. That's not usual for canning, but it's how this recipe was tested, so that's what I'm doing. And also it does not say to skin the chicken. And personally, I don't eat chicken skin. I always skin my chicken to cook it. But as I said, this is for my dogs and they like it. And you'll notice that I've put on gloves, not because I'm canning, but because I'm handling chicken. So all you have to do now is fit the chicken down in the jars. I'm using regular mouth pint jars. And most of these chicken thighs are about the size that you can put 2 in a pint jar. And you may have to do some mix and matching. You're supposed to put chicken in up to a generous 1-inch headspace. What's more important than that is the level of the water. The level of the water needs to be at 1 inch. And I'm debubbling with my chopsticks. I also have a little notch in my chopsticks at 1 inch. And when you debubble, you'll need to add a little bit more water up to the 1 inch mark. And I know you can't see that, so I'll do it at a different angle next time so you can. A word about headspace. To be sure that your canning is safe, you need to follow a tested recipe. By the way, I'm checking the jar rim there to make sure there are no chinks. And that tested recipe will include a headspace. Generally, with meat, it's 1 inch. Meat and most vegetables for low acid foods. For fruits, it's generally a 1/2 inch. And for jams and jellies, it's a 1/4 inch. No matter what lid you're using, you need to follow the directions for headspace. Okay, my jar is full, my headspace is right, I've cleaned the rim with vinegar. Now I'm going to put the lid on, and I'm going to show you what I showed you before. If it fits properly, you won't see any of the seal showing from the rim. And I've put my camera on top so you can see there's no seal sticking out. So now we're going to put the lid on, the ring on, and I'm going to explain finger tight to you. When you put this lid on, turn it backwards a little bit, and that'll help it be seated properly. And then tighten it. Yeah, I'm having trouble. There, it caught. And without touching the jar, turn the lid until you meet resistance. Then with your fingers, just your fingers, not your fist, turn it. Finger tight does not mean loose. You don't want to leave this loose, but you don't want to crank it down with your fist. Just use your fingers. This is going in the canner. I'm going to do one more just so you can see it again, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about finger tight and why it's important. You need to have a firm seal with your ring against the lid, but that doesn't mean a tight seal. The directions from Ball say, turn the ring until you feel resistance, and then a little more with your fingers. That little bit more is usually about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to debubble this jar, and really the water level goes down, so be sure that you do your debubbling and you're checking for headspace before you do your vinegar clean. And you'll see when I debubbled here, the level goes down below 1 inch. So I'm going to add a little bit more. And we'll move that chicken around just a little bit to make sure that the chicken itself is not above the inch. Checking the rim of the jar. Doing a vinegar wash on the outside. The vinegar wash is very important, by the way. And let's see if I can show you. I've got this notched at 1 inch. So I just touched the water, and I've got, actually I may have a little bit more than 1 inch there. But you can see I'm checking it. And it's just a little bit more than 1 inch. So I'm going to take a spoon, take out just a little bit of the water. And then I'll check it again. And yes, it's at 1 inch. I'm going to, just in case I got some fat up on the rim, I'm going to use the vinegar again. And then I'll fit everything together. And let me finish my thought on headspace. To be sure your canning is safe, you want to use only recipes that have been tested according to USDA guidelines. That includes everything: heat up time, cool down time, headspace, the size of the pieces, everything. I'm putting this lid on, and I'm going to do finger tight. Watch this one more time to get resistance, and then about 1/4 of an inch. For safe canning, those are the directions you use. Okay, I have 6 jars. They're in my canner. I have the proper amount of water. Now, I really need to polish this, don't I? Anyway, before I start canning, I check this little vent hole always. When you hold it up, and you can't see it on a video, you can see a little pinpoint of light, and that means it's not clogged. So I use an All-American canner, different sizes. This one's a 21 quart, holds 7 quarts, 8 pints, and you can stack the pints. So you tighten these on opposite sides until they're all closed. And take note, this recipe called for room temperature jars, so my water is not very hot yet, but it usually would be, so be very careful. Once it's closed, turn your heat up to high and listen for the venting. When you see and hear a solid plume of steam coming out, set your timer for 10 minutes. That will vent the air out of your canner, which is important. Your canner can't reach the right temperature until it is vented. After the 10 minutes, put your weight on. My canner also has a gauge, so I can see that it's at 11 pounds, which is the right pressure for my altitude. At this point, I turn my heat down to what I have previously marked as the sweet spot, which is the highest heat that will maintain just the pressure, but not let too much steam escape. And I'm setting my timer for 65 minutes, which is the time for bone-in chicken in pints. At the end of that 65 minutes, I'll turn my heat off and let my canner pressure come down to 0. Now, a little quirk of AA canners that in every one I've used, and I have 4, I find, is that there's a tiny little bit of steam left no matter how long you wait. So I generally let it loose very carefully, very slowly, with a pot holder before I remove the weight, because you don't want anything sudden to happen that will cause siphoning. So after I remove the weight, I set my timer and wait another 10 minutes before I take the lid off. The contents inside are still super hot, and you want to remove this carefully. Don't get burned. That one's a little bit tight. And when you remove the lid, turn it away from you so that the escaping steam doesn't just come right up into your face. I then let them sit for another 10 minutes. If you'll look at those jars, you'll see they are still boiling. This is still very hot contents. Now, in preparation for taking my jars out, I put down something to cushion them so that you don't put the hot jar right on a hard surface because it's more likely to break. So I'm removing my jars onto this padded surface. Those are little silicone pads. And now I'll show you something that is unique to Tattlers. When you're using the regular metal lids, you're not supposed to retighten your rings. Here, let me move this camera. I dab the top with a paper towel to get the hot water off. Just lightly dab it. And now we're going to return these jars to finger tight. You don't want to crank them down. You just want to return them to finger tight. Remember when I said we have to make 2 seals when we're using Tattlers? You need to seal the ring to the jar and to the lid. So what we're doing is just firming up the ring to help hold it in place until it forms its seal. And that takes from 12 to 24 hours. Now, the reason I'm dabbing these with the paper towel is because when they come out, the lid has become concave, meaning it dips down, and it'll hold some of the hot water. And I don't want my dish towels, let's see, finger tight, about an 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. I don't want my dish towels to get wet with the hot water because then I'll burn my hand. So I'm going to show you another one here. Just lightly dab, dab, dab. Cover the top with a clean, dry cloth. And then I have another one for my hand because there can be some dripping. You want to protect your hands, and it's very hot. Finger tight, 1/4 of an inch. Why finger tight? Because your goal here is for the ring is to hold the lid and the seal in place. It's not to form a seal. It is to allow the lid and the ring to form their seal. So you're just holding it in place. If you crank it down hard, you can break the seal that's already started forming. So finger tight, don't crank it down. This is the next morning. I've let those sit for 12 hours, and now I'm going to check it. Now, sometimes these nice little white lids, they'll show some dark spots from the water because the water can get dark from any carbonization inside the lid, and then it'll drip on your jars and they'll look dirty to you. Just wait until they're dry and you're going to wash it off. Be no problem. So I'm taking my rings off, and full disclosure here, I haven't actually used my Tattlers in over a year because I had a bunch of metal lids. See, there's a little bit of that darkening. Don't let that worry you. It'll just wipe off. Because I had a bunch of metal lids that were getting kind of old and I wanted to use them up. So this is the first time I've used Tattlers in over a year. And I had to remind myself of these steps because it is a little bit different. As I say, it takes about seconds more per jar, but it's so worth it. Have you seen the price of metal lids? Oh my goodness. They've really gone up. So I'm wiping that off. See that nice shiny white seal lid? I really like the white ones. So now let's test them. You should be able to pick the jar up by the lid and make sure that it's secure. See, I'm trying to pull them loose and can't. Whoops, I missed a ring. Let me take that off. And Glorioski, they all sealed. And they said it couldn't be done. When I first started using Tattlers, I sometimes had a seal failure. But upon reflection, I find that it was always user error. So here they are, all cleaned up and ready to put away. Always store them with the rings off. And just so you know, I did another load after this one, and they also all sealed. So you can do this. I hope you try them. I hope you like them. And I hope to see you again tomorrow on Debbie's Back Porch. Oh, and I still don't like chicken skin.